Well, I've thought about this since the event, and I've thought about the Connected Britain event and just the kind of evolution, if you like, of the industry. And I kind of describe it in the three C's now for me. I mean, we used to talk about collaboration a lot of the time. So when I was in government, we had this big challenge of trying to roll out fibre, and fibre was at 3, 4, 5, 6% coverage, and it's wherever it is now, 70, 80, 90%, depending on where you look. Yeah, it was all about collaboration to start with. And then we started talking about consolidation, and that's kind of the stage we're at now. We're talking about, we're going to have 100 plus altnets coming down to however many in the future. They're going to be niche players. They're going to be large groupings together of some larger altnets. And I think you'll move into the capitulation stage as well at some point, where some of the altnets just cannot continue to survive.
So I'm Ian Ginn, the host of Digital Talk, and I am fortunate to have been able to assemble a panel of experts to discuss the key topics at this year's Connected Britain and to provide you, our audience, with a wrap-up. Without further ado, let me make a brief introduction of my guests. Raj Kalia, former CEO of Build Digital UK, has over 20 years of experience driving large-scale connectivity projects. Paddy Patterson is a veteran of industry and currently the CEO of the Independent Network Cooperative Association, otherwise known as INCA, and also founder of Wildernet, which is an altnet in the southwest of England. Harry Baldock is an editor at Total Telecom, the organizer of this event. Harry leads the coverage of global telecoms news, digital infrastructure innovation. Welcome to the podcast panel. So what we said we'd do in preparation for our listeners is we'll just go a few themes. I've got some themes to discuss. The first thing I want to do is, of course, talk about the event as a whole. So this year's Connected Britain was more than 8,000 visitors, and it's the largest gathering of professionals around connectivity in the UK, with more than 300 exhibitors and 400 speakers. And I believe all of you were speakers of some form or another on panels. You maybe want to share more on that in a minute. And it's, all around trends, policy in the UK market, and was held at Excel. The stakeholders, these are the people I think, the way I'd sort of try and divvy it up, I'd like your views on this as well. And input was obviously the government itself and the BDUK, including people like Digital Catapult, but also the tier ones were on stage. They didn't have stands, I don't think. Actually, that's not true. Virgin Media did, but BT were there. Virgin Media 2 and 3, Vodafone 3 had representations. Then we had the whole altnet community, which I guess is the bulk of it. But then, of course, a bunch of vendors managing the whole life cycle, of connectivity. Local councils, which is quite novel. I don't know too many projects that bring that in. And then charities and the startups, the whole startup section. Have I missed something out of that? Does someone want to? I'm going to look at Harry at this point because you are the closest associated with the organizer of the event. Have I captured that to some degree?
No, absolutely. I think that was great. Yeah, I mean, as the organizer of Connected Britain, I think, we at Total Telecom really are always trying to capture not just, I think, how the connectivity market's evolving, but also how the kind of impact of connectivity becoming more and more kind of ubiquitous across society, how that's the whole kind of digital economy is evolving. And I think every year we try and expand, make it broaden the remit further and further. And yeah, I mean, as you say, there's loads of different people there on site, and hopefully that's led to quite a few exciting and interesting conversations. Maybe that you wouldn't get kind of a typical telecoms event, quote unquote.
I love the idea where normally you say take the man to the pub, but we managed to do the reverse this time. We brought the pub to the people. I thought that was a genius idea. And Paddy, what about you? Have you got any comments about the setting the scene of the event?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. It's one of those events where you can go along and you walk 10 yards and you have a 10-minute conversation with somebody, and then another 10 yards and it's another 10-minute conversation. So if you actually need to be somewhere, like you're on a stage soon, you have to do the eyes on the prize and not make eye contact with anybody as you're moving across the place. It is really good for that. I remember back in the 90s, the Cable Forum used to do a conference that had the same sort of vibe of everybody being there, and you knew that you'd be able to connect with everybody you knew.
Fantastic. And Raj, to you, what was your sort of impression of the event overall?
Well, I mean, in terms of stakeholders, first of all, I think, it's an important event where, as well as everything you've listed, there's customers there as well. So, there's vendors there, and it's a great place for customers to come and look at what vendors have got to do, look at what some of the competition has got to offer as well. I just recall, I mean, building on what Paddy said, I mean, I sat down in one of the sessions, and who knew I'd be sitting down next to somebody that heads up the connectivity for the BBC, for instance. So, it's just the things you just wouldn't get that when you're just in your regular run of the mill kind of working day, of course. But I think Connected Britain does bring together so many different kinds of people, and you have the opportunity just to meet people that you've never met before and have really, really rich conversations.
And it's quite efficient in that way, isn't it? Because you can get a lot done in a few days. Making notes afterwards gets more challenging as to who was it I met again. That's a whole other kind of.
I had a little notebook that I was just putting the name and the thing I'd promised to do next to it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So if you move on to our first topic as well, and this is, I'll ask Raj to comment on this, but from my side, talking to some of the altnets, I've heard that there's been quite a lot of speed dating going on. That's what they described it to me about different altnets. But yet again, at the event and teeing up to the event, I was assuming, in these discussions that you just mentioned, that would be a hot topic. But somehow I felt it was sort of not as mature or advanced as I expected. But I'll leave that. Raj, what's your take on it?
Well, I've thought about this since the event, and I've thought about the Connected Britain event and just the kind of evolution, if you like, of the industry. And I kind of describe it in the three C's now. For me, I mean, we used to talk about collaboration a lot of the time. So when I was in government, and we had this big challenge of trying to roll out fibre, and fibre was at 3, 4, 5, 6% coverage, and it's wherever it is now, 70, 80, 90%, depending on where you look. Yeah, it was all about collaboration to start with. And then we started talking about consolidation, and that's kind of the stage we're at now. We're talking about, we're going to have 100 plus altnets coming down to however many in the future. They're going to be niche players. They're going to be large groupings together of some larger altnets. And I think you'll move into the capitulation stage as well at some point, where some of the altnets just cannot continue to survive. So I think, to answer your point, Ian, the way I look at it is there are conversations happening, and they're happening all the time. They're happening behind closed doors. They can't be public conversations. They can't be conversations that in the press or in ISP review, for instance. Because if somebody is going to potentially have a conversation that's a winner and a loser having a conversation, for instance, the loser doesn't want anyone to know the terms that they've agreed a deal on to move forward. So yeah, I mean, look, I say capitulation in a very kind of flippant way, but the consolidation of altnets, I think, is something that's happening. It's stalled a bit because of all the things we know about valuation gaps and all the kind of stuff that means that two parties can't agree, and whether that's egos, whether it's shareholders, whether it's operational teams, or all of the above. It's a very complex kind of merger, if you like, and that's we touched on the panel that I ran, which was about in the times of cable, there was a lot of cash around, and you could go acquire entities. There's no cash around now, so any mergers that are happening are all happening behind closed doors, where two parties agree what each other's paper is worth, and how you merge on that basis. So I think it is happening, but it's happening behind closed doors. But I think it needs to pick up pace. Was a general sense that I got from the whole from both days as well. I don't know, Paddy, whether you thought something similar from what you took away.
It's that constant conversation around, who's going to merge with whom. And again, go back to the 90s. I used to go into the office at Farnborough, the NTL office, and used to look left and see what new brass plaque was there. It happened at pace then. And as you say, there was flush money around. What was it? $4 billion in 3 years at one point. It went at pace. But some of them in those days were building to be bought almost. It was a very different mentality as well. And I think one of the differences now is, one, it's different kind of money. So the investors and the teams behind them are different to back in the 90s. And I'd also say that with some of them, they've been in it long enough that now they're looking at EBITDA positive. They can see cash flow positive on the horizon. So their investors are looking at it and going, right, where's the best value point? And it's not the same thing that it was a year ago. You know, a year ago, we were looking at really expensive money, practically no money around. And I think that's changed it. And I think that'll delay it further. And, you know, there's always the who will go with who. You've got City Fibre built their war chest for it. Next Fibre and VMO2 have always had a war chest for it. And I think at the moment, they're just at the opportunity strikes rather than the good consolidation deals.
Mm-hmm. Good comment. And Harry, what's your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, I find it really interesting because I feel like, you know, every year I go to Connected Britain, I speak to, you know, half a dozen altnets and the bigger operators, and it's the same kind of thing. And they're all saying, oh, you know, we're going to be the chosen partner. We're going to be driving this discussion and moving this forward. And then in reality, well, you know, as you guys have already covered, it just becomes so complex. And I think, particularly given the macroeconomic situation, it's very difficult to kind of get this done. I mean, something I think is quite interesting is these kind of platforms that are evolving, like Zen's Fiber Hub, where they're trying to kind of bring these altnets together and kind of, I guess, make it easier for ISPs to work with the smaller players all kind of conglomerated together. I don't know what that's going to do in terms of consolidation. I mean, I'd be keen to hear maybe your views, Paddy.
It almost pushes it down the road a bit more.
Exactly.
It?
Yeah, and I wonder. I think, especially as you say, these altnets are kind of reaching a point now where they're focusing on take up, and they're kind of trying to find ways to kind of differentiate themselves. I think maybe there's the impression that I got at Connected Britain was that perhaps more of these altnets actually have the potential for kind of at least kind of maybe midterm longevity than we probably would have thought a year or two ago. I think they're kind of reaching a point where maybe they can kind of go this alone, or find some new ways with these platform approaches to kind of eke it out on their own for a little bit longer. But yeah, I don't know whether you guys agree.
I think there's some that you would look at and go, why would they ever merge with anybody? You know, that have, you know, a solid base, a solid footprint, and why you wouldn't get extra value by going with anybody. And I think they're starting to form at the moment, which, as you say, wasn't the same as last year, which in turn wasn't the same as the year before, because the year before there was still, you know, the point that I saw it was the Liz Truss government, wasn't it? So before that, we were all sat there going, who's got the money? Who's going to do it? And then after that, money, what's that? And we're just rising out of that now. I don't think there's new money coming around. It is sort of, you know, very difficult to get hold of, which makes that dramatic consolidation effort practically impossible at this stage.
I was actually, I think, in your panel discussion, Raj, and it is a good one. And I thought was interesting about the fact that the idea of just exchanging paper, you know, doesn't cut it and doesn't make it a good business. You just have maybe two problem childs together. And without the extra money investment, you need to have a third sort of component to that. It's maybe two altnets plus some money. But yeah, I think we're all in sync there that it's a challenge, and we'll see. But I think Raj is keeping what's happening behind closed doors to himself or not, and also Paddy. But these things have to be done, of course, away from the public eye, that's for sure.
Today's episode is sponsored by IFG Consulting Europe, who help operators to tap into technologies to accelerate digitization of the network, drive revenues, and reduce costs by championing promising software providers in telecoms, enterprise, and mobile markets. Go to ifgconsultingeurope.com to find out more.
If we can move on to our second topic, and I'd ask you, Paddy, maybe to add to this. I think it's a nice segue actually to what we were just discussing, which is about how can altnets, you know, grow to be healthy, or what's the way of becoming viable?
Yeah, so I mean, I spent the last year, because I started as CEO of Inca about this time last year. And I spent the year going around visiting the members to go and, you know, see what's what on the ground, because my blinkered view was of Wilderness, which is a small operator down in the southwest. You know, it's 7 hours to get to London to get involved in things and like that. So there was sort of a commonality about that change in mentality from build to customer, and that's what's going on. So to grow healthy and to be viable, it's about that. It's about your penetration rate. It's about your churn rate. It's about those old-fashioned, solid KPIs that give the annuity that makes the business survive. How to do that? I would say you build local and you operate national. You don't need, if you're a small operator, you don't need a 24/7 knock for 100,000 prems, 200,000 prems. But if you had one with other operators collectively, then it becomes viable. And there are other functions that can go that way. I point to the C in Inca, the cooperative bit, which, although I agree with Raj on those 3 C's, I still lean back on that cooperative element will help altnets become more viable. And the connection with Zen that you've been seeing going around, Inca had a meeting at Zen's offices to work on we have special interest groups, and the wholesale standards group created a sort of a wholesale framework with APIs and everything, so that we can go to all of the ISPs and go, okay, I understand that it's the same cost taking on City Fibre as it is taking on Wildnet, but why the hell would you do Wildnet? But if it's the same process for everybody, it makes it easier and makes it more simple. So that's the other way, is standardization around some elements.
Anyone to chip in on that?
Well, I'll play devil's advocate a little bit here, and I said this on my panel. The altnet is a dying species, was the thing that I said, because I genuinely believe that there's too many altnets out there, and you have a process of evolution that's going to be facilitated by consolidation, which will leave some winners and an awful lot of losers. There's a lot of debt out there and not a lot of customers, and the investors are sat there. Some are patient, some are not patient. I think there's quite a lot of non-patient capital sat on the sidelines, challenging their management teams to connect, not build now. As Paddy says, the focus has changed. So, and if they don't succeed, then you're at the table having that awful conversation where somebody needs to figure out how they save face because the investment's gone bad, and to do a paper merger or whatever the case might be. But I think, look, I think it's what's happening is evolution. You're seeing a whole bunch of altnets that all went out for the gold rush, and there's going to be winners and losers. It's as simple as that. And I think we should reflect on, has it been a good thing for UK PLC? The capital efficiency of the amount of money that's gone into it and so on. And could government have done something different? Because we've basically said there's infrastructure competition here. We've stimulated infrastructure competition. And I can put my hands up to that because I was the one that kind of set up Project Gigabit and so on. But that's just in the rural areas. But, we created the framework and we wooed the industry with promises of fantastic returns, and they haven't materialized. And, so is it healthy? I wouldn't say the altnet industry as a whole is healthy, but it will become healthy because, the weak will fall by the wayside, however that happens. And that doesn't necessarily mean, if you're a small player, you can't succeed, because I think there's absolutely a world and a place for small niche players that dominate their market. So, for instance, such as Wildnet, I don't think there's a queue of people wanting to go into that territory, apart from Openreach probably will still come and want to eat your lunch, Paddy. So.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, that question of overbuild, when we first started, we were all looking at each other and going, "Oh, don't tell anybody where you're building. It's a massive digital land grab." So we had airband next to us. There's practically no overbuild of airband and Wildnet. It's some minor, there's a couple of streets where there's interesting competition and shenanigans, let's call it, going on. But the reality is, and I exclude London in that's not the same market. The reality is that once you've put your network in, there's the asset, and overbuilding it, you don't take any more market by building over somebody else, an altnet's fibre. If you're another altnet, yes, I get it with the incumbent. They will do what they will do. and that game will play out over time, I suppose. They do change how much they're going to say depending on the wind from government at any one moment. Some days it's 31 million, and then it's, I don't think we can get the investment. It'll only be 25 and what have you. It's part of their influential game, but they'll do what they do. They're still the real competition for altnets. And it took us ages for us to realize that it wasn't each other that were the competition, which was a shame. If we'd have realized that earlier, there might have been, some better outcomes. Yeah.
And Harry, what do you have to say on this question of how can they grow healthily?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big challenge, isn't it? I think a lot of what already has been said reflects what I've kind of been hearing from altnets in terms of really capitalizing on the kind of the local presence and kind of that local character. I had quite an interesting chat with Guy Miller, for the CEO of MS3. And maybe I'm just going to be cheeky and throw it back to Paddy a little bit, because he was telling me about this kind of new infrastructure sharing framework that's coming out, which I think is, again, quite interesting. And as Paddy was saying about, kind of, it's a shame in effect, in the sense that maybe this hadn't come out earlier, because maybe the kind of the landscape would have been very different now had we had this 2 years ago. I think maybe you can say a few words about that, Paddy.
Yeah, I mean, this comes from another one of the cooperation, the special interest groups, where the different members get together and come to agreement. So the infrastructure framework came around, partially kicked off by the issue around poles. And the reason that Guy Miller chairs it is Hull, which was the pole capital of the country now, I think.
Got a lot of poles to deal with, yeah.
Yeah. And that was down to there not being PIA available. So there wasn't infrastructure sharing available. It was just not there. So what do you do? Well, you've got to roll out. So, that's what ended up. So we're now at the position where, okay, your network's rolled out. How do you make sure you sweat that asset? Do you make sure that nobody ever touches it? I don't think that's a sensible thing. Do you share all of your network? That's probably not sensible either. But there's an in-between way. The ATI regulations, the access to infrastructure regulations, they don't work really. I know some examples where, over a 2-year and £10,000 rental process, 3 poles were sorted out. That's not access to infrastructure. That's just penalising an industry. So there needs to be a better way. And what we thought we'd do was start off with a framework to start that better way. It doesn't talk to the commercials of it. It talks to the practicalities of it, of how you would do it and how you would show what you've got and how you can find out what network is available to be shared. Not everybody will want to do it, but some may see an advantage in other bits. I mean, one of the things that had worked well on that was integrating it with local authority network and infrastructure. ITS managed to do a contract. So rather than building 200 kilometers of stuff, they shared infrastructure over that distance and managed to put in a network down there, which I thought was a real win.
Does that deal with the wayleave problem as well a bit, or at least roll it up into it? Because in the day, not everyone's having to get a wayleave, because then it's basically within one.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Wayleaves is the curse at the moment, isn't it? It's the the amount of network that is stalled trying to get a network it's just too much and it's too difficult. And again, this is where regulation can help, but isn't at the moment. The PSTI Act was supposed to aid that, and you can, force a landlord to go to court and get an order. But have you got £30,000 to do that, to get to a £20 a month contract? It's just, it's not reasonable. So there has to be some movement over that. And one of the good things that's happening with the regional authorities, Liverpool and Manchester and places like that, is that they're creating common wayleaves. So they're going to especially their social landlords, and going, right, I know you're getting knocked on the door by all of these altnets and it's really annoying. Here's how we can help you with this common wayleave so that you know what's coming. So that, the local authorities are trying to join in and trying to help on that as much as they can. Especially on the social area, and so I can see there being a future that's better. But the longer it's delayed, the less likely the operators, and I include Openreach in this, they're less likely they are to go into those places where the wayleaves are difficult. And that's quite often social housing. If you make it difficult to get to them, you've got a finite amount of investment. That investment burns every day. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to build down the road, aren't you? You're not going to come back to that one. I know Virgin Media build where there's a street that's not done because the road was private and it was just like too difficult, move on. And that's what 30 years ago. Yeah.
But I guess the one thing on that flip side of if you can get a house to or whatever to allow access, there is a good story around the valuation of buildings. People now, when they look at a house, I think there's been studies being done. One of the first questions is not, how good is my connectivity here, right? So there is a good story to try and promote that idea.
It was one of the wild ideas we had when we started rolling out WildNet fibre was, perhaps we could buy a house before we knew it was going to get fibre. and then reap the benefit.
Okay.
That one never came around, but it was one of those, pub ideas that we thought, oh yeah, that'll be great. 10% on every house that you just do. Yeah,
it does solve the wayleave problem though. If you buy the house, right?
If you buy the house as well, they get a wayleave.
Exactly. Yeah. You can give yourself and pay yourself £20 a month, but that won't cut it, will it? I think we've covered that quite well, but it is a question of scale. I think fundamentally, the number I've also heard is, for an OLT, so technical perspective, that about 30%, you need to sort of have 30% of your OLTs with service for business case to make sense. I'm sure it changes a different company, but you need to achieve that. But of course, as you mentioned, all of you mentioned about the wholesale stroke retail ISP game should, allow people who maybe have got affinity with a particular ISP now, just, connect to that to your network and vice versa. So I guess there's a trust issue there with some of the smaller altnets where people like bigger brands by definition.
Yeah, it was a word I was taught by Helen Wild when she was CEO of WildNet, because we didn't agree on wholesale. She was very much about the retail and about the brand. And she was worried about disintermediation, which I had to go and Google afterwards. But, that diluting what you are by doing that. But my feeling was, if you build 10 houses and you can only sell to 4 of them because that's your normal penetration, what about the others that you've spent money getting to? And it's a good idea to use somebody else's marketing budget for that.
Perfect. Totally agree. So we've just been talking about how these altnets can grow effectively, but there's also the whole concept and problem, we think, of digital divide and the world of AI and education as well. So I think, Harry, you've got an angle on this that you wanted to share with us, and we can then talk in the round.
Yeah, I mean, the digital divide's a huge problem. I think it kind of links quite nicely to what Paddy was saying about kind of wayleaves, really, where I think people often think of the digital divide purely as, it's people out in the sticks that don't have connectivity, and it's not kind of economically viable for the infrastructure providers to go out there and get them. But there's a lot of places in urban communities and stuff like that don't have this connectivity. And I mean, really, when I kind of talk to people about this, I think there's kind of maybe 3 points that kind of come out of it. I think obviously one is with access to the infrastructure, which I think across the UK, both fibre and mobile and everything there's been a lot of progress. I think in general, we've done quite a good job over the past few years, but there's also still quite a lot of places where we really need to do better. There's, to a certain extent, I think people kind of hope that this is going to be fixed by maybe technological breakthroughs, things like satellite, things like FWA getting better, that kind of stuff. And maybe it is to a certain extent, but that's kind of not going to be the whole of it. And similarly, I think, and Raj, I'm sure you can talk to this in terms of kind of Project Gigabit and kind of other projects between kind of public-private partnerships about kind of the shared rural network and stuff like this. I think we're doing quite well there, but the frameworks are never quite, I think, good enough to get maybe that last kind of 5%. So that's difficult. But I think kind of beyond the infrastructure itself, there's kind of issues around affordability. We're in a tough economic climate. People don't want to pay more money, but at the same time, all the telcos are constantly complaining about kind of flat revenues. So like, how do you kind of square that circle? I think Ofcom's really trying to push these players to bring out things like social tariffs. So I think a lot of companies do provide those, but at the same time, I think that the take up on those is very, very small. I don't think they're particularly heavily advertised. Lots of people don't really know about them. And then finally, yeah, I mean, like the digital skills aspect is ginormous as well, because we've got an aging population, technology is changing so fast, and there's a real chance that lots of people get kind of left behind here. I think it was kind of quite a big focus at Connected Britain was kind of what do we do about this? And I think these discussions used to be, how do we help educate, I think primarily kind of elderly people about how to use technology, because they're the ones who don't understand, and as everything gets more and more digitized, they're the ones that kind of miss out on things like digital public services and things like that. But I was actually moderating a panel on kind of digital education and kind of with AI kind of having burst onto the scene and it being so readily available for everyone. It's how kids are using this and how it's maybe impacting their kind of education sector and things like critical thinking and kind of media literacy is really a huge problem. And I think it's not something that we've really got a national framework to fix. I think regulation and kind of government intervention in these things always comes a bit too late. I know, for example, like the EU's got an AI Act that I think comes into full effect as of like next year. I think is
15th of December it should be published. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean stuff's coming, but I'm not sure maybe it's coming fast enough. And I also think there's lots of elements of this where you can regulate a school and tell the school maybe we should run an AI class for your 7-year-olds or whatever. But the reality is, as soon as those kids go home, it's kind of at the will of the parents, like how much access they have to digital technology, how much they use it, how much oversight they have on how they're doing that. And it's I just think it's an absolute minefield. It feels like there's no really good answer, and nobody has a good solution for kind of how to move forward in this area. But yeah, I'm not sure if the other panelists have any thoughts on that.
Well, we're in the early days of AI, really, aren't we? So we don't know what it's going to do and what it's going to benefit. If you go to a technology and when it can offer you something, we usually take it up. So, I remember being told that, well, you won't have a calculator when you're walking the streets, will you? I kind of do. And so we had to learn how to do, maths by written. If you've got a device that will think for you, then it's probably natural that that's what we'll let it do. So I think you're right to call out critical thinking and things like that, which is a real concern. So yeah, I worry about that. I don't know the solution to it, but I don't think that AI in the form it's at the moment is going to provide that as much as people are hyping it up to be. We're sort of in the in the early 2000s when the internet was booming and things, and everybody threw money at it until what was 2001 bust, wasn't it? Wow, I had the feeling we're sort of there. What's the benefit that we get from it other than, I don't know, you can write an email for me, or give me some research that I should really doubt. Those kind of things. But yeah, to go to what you were saying around the people that are left behind, and it's not just the old people. I think that's a really important thing. Digital skills, and this is something that I learned over the last year. Digital skills are different for different things. So because you can use Excel doesn't mean you can use IPTV, doesn't mean you can use a mobile. There's such a broad spectrum, and you can't learn it unless you need it. And that moment of need can come at any time. When we were rolling out fixed wireless access across Cornwall, as Wilderness started with radio, we negotiated a whaling with a chap to put it in his field out the back, Peter, 70-year-old chap, didn't want much money for it, but when we fitted it, he said, look, can you show me how to use the internet properly and things? Actually, what I did for an afternoon is set up his television so that he got ITVX and BBC iPlayer, with him and his wife going, how do we get to see Heartbeat? And so I taught them how to watch Heartbeat. And that's what they wanted from all of that technology. That's what they wanted from it. And they were super happy with it. But they learned a thing that they really needed. And I'm sure they watch all the other programs now. So it's that, yes, the access, that's what we're doing. But the connectivity comes after that. Access to the curb is useless. The skills is really important. And the equipment, yeah, I don't know how we solved that one. Getting good equipment to people. Yeah.
Just before passing over to Raj on this one, we actually, and that's credit to Connected Britain, there are several charities there who I talked to who are involved with helping people to have access and understand this digital technology. And I think one of the interviews which I actually did the other day, which hopefully will release soon, was they're mentioning about 10 million people in the UK are digitally disadvantaged. And that is a huge number of various types. But of course, this divide just gets larger as the work becomes more digitally dependent. And, tying back to the social element and the councils, is that if you have good tenants who can be digitally savvy, there's a good chance they'll get a job, which means that they can maybe pay enough. So it's a full circle there that can be closed. But I think, Raj, maybe you can just to finish on this topic. I'm sure you've got a few comments you wanted to add to that, what we said.
Just picking up on the connectivity piece first of all. So obviously, I was in Building Digital UK, and we set up that kind of Project Gigabit. There was an outside-in program. A fundamental part of it was you start from the outside and you move back in. The reality is that I don't think that's actually happened universally. So you are going to get a situation, I fear. Well, two things I see happening at the minute. One is when I was in government, there was a lot of front page news about this. Boris announced his 2020, gigabit coverage, 95% gigabit coverage by 2025, for instance. Which was possibly one of the biggest headaches that I've ever had to live through in government, trying to unravel that one. But that's a whole new story.
He just seemed to say it. Yeah, there was no
yes.
sort of. Yeah.
But my point being that this was front page news. This was high political fodder. Everybody wanted to talk about it, and now we've got pretty good coverage around, and lots of people are able to access full fibre. I get there's not spots in urban areas as well, and we have to figure that out. I don't think it's as exciting anymore in government. I don't think the push is there anymore. I don't think so. My fear is that whilst we have the programs and they're set up to be outside in, that they don't fizzle away, but they're just not front page news anymore. And then there's less postbox coming into to ministers now, and so there's less pressure coming from ministers to drive the program and so on and so forth. So there's a little bit of a concern there that we might still see, it being hard yards to get the last 95 to 100%, for instance. We can talk about what technology works, whether it's FWA and so on in a few minutes, I'm sure. But once you've got the connectivity, then it's the services that you can consume on top of that connectivity. And we talked about AI being something, and AI's piggybacking on the kind of quantum compute revolution as well. You need the computing power in order to be able to run AI, and what will it do for us? I think we're just so much at the beginning of what AI could possibly do. It's just unimaginable. If you think about, I mentioned evolution before of the altnets. Well, think about evolution of the species. If you genuinely believe, well, there's different views here. We came from an amoeba or whatever, and evolved to through to become the species that we are now. Another 1,000, 2,000 years with AI. I mean, what might a human being actually be? There's a horrible, scary thing there, and I think safety is the other concern then, and that's why you're seeing regulation. You're seeing governments really trying to get all over AI, because kind of tracked, who knows where it could go. So governments probably want to regulate it, control it, and entrepreneurs want to be free to be able to do what they want to do and explore the capital gains from being able to do what they want to do. But where's the kind of sweet spot in between? We just don't know yet. It's a bit of a wild west, I suppose. So security, regulation are essential, but I think they're always playing catch up. I mean, AI is just at the beginning. So and we talk about how we can make the workplace more efficient and so on and so forth. I just think that's just the absolute beginning, and we can't even contemplate where it will be in generations generations down the line. And that's what I think is the difficult thing you're trying to regulate for, when you just don't know where it's going to go and what it could do.
Yeah, we were with the podcast here at the AI for Good Summit run by the ITU, it's International Telecoms Union, in the summer, where they try and bring together these different groupings who are using AI. And so that's quite a good event for you to consider going forward. But just moving on to the next topic, considering time, we wanted to talk, as you just teed up yourself there, Raj, fixed wireless access and rural connectivity. I think on the second day I was in the audience one of the panel discussions, and they were making quite a few noises about, well, isn't that a clever way of just, trying to get an extra whole group of subscribers on the network? But again, over to you on what do you think, whether it is a real alternative for the rural areas or not?
Well, I think technology is the answer here, because if I look back at what FWA could do when I was in government and what it could do now, they're kind of light years apart, so that's the point. And I think when I was in government and we were coming up with policy, gigabit capable was the kind of mantra, but really it was kind of full fibre is the way you're going to get gigabit capable. But if you look at where we are now, the technology, the chipsets, et cetera, that are involved in FWA solutions have advanced so much that you can get multi-gig capable services. And I think Airband won an award, didn't they? At the one of the Connected Grid Awards for innovation. So I think there is a place for FWA, definitely, to kind of number one, make it more capital efficient in order to deliver connectivity in the more rural areas, so 95% and beyond, and maybe even less than that, because let's face it, I mean, the customer doesn't say, "Oh, can I have an FWA service?" They just don't say that. They just want connectivity, and they want it to be able to do what it can do. So, we as industry need to deliver that as a reliable service, whether it's a wireline service or whether it's a fixed line service, really shouldn't make any difference. I mean, I really liked actually the kind of innovative delivery models when I was in government, where people, I think Quickline were doing this and some others, where they'd start FWA in an area in order to get customers, and then they'd subsequently go back, and when they had a critical mass, they'd roll out full fibre on top of the FWA and then move on and move on and move on, and that's how you kind of traverse across an area. I thought that was quite cute, but I think there is a space for FWA. I think the challenger for FWA, if I'm really honest, in real rural, will be mobile. We mentioned, I think, SRN at some point earlier on, but as mobile coverage gets better and mobile services get better, and you can actually get 5G delivering what it can actually deliver, and there is capacity in the backhaul networks and so on and so forth. I think mobile will be a big part of the solution in lots of parts of the country, and maybe Leo as well. I think there's a space for Leo. So I don't think there's a silver bullet in rural, but FWA definitely has progressed in technology terms. I think should take more of the kind of 5 to 95 to 100%. But I do think mobile and Leo a tiny bit, I think, will have done some penetration.
So can you just for audience explain, was it SRN you said?
Yeah, Shared Rural Network it was one of the other programs that I led when I was in government. It's a mobile networks that at the minute are delivering 4G coverage across the UK. Will it end up as a 5G program? Who knows? Because the next thing you think is, once we've got 4G everywhere, there's going to be a 5G digital divide, isn't it? Because only the urban or kind of competitive areas, commercial areas, will have 5G, and then there'll be 5G have-not. So will there be a 5G infill program in the future? Who knows? I don't know. It depends whether government has a massive black hole or not, and they've got some money to spend on 5G infill programs, because the commercial market will just say they can't do it because it's not commercially viable. So,
Paddy, I presume you've got a view on this.
Yeah, I've resisted on it. So I confess, radio is my first love. It's where I started in the military, and it's I've gone through. My feeling is that fibre first should be the policy, especially if it's government investment. If you're looking at an asset that can last 30, 40 years versus an asset that lasts 10, it's obviously wiser to do that. But there is a commercial point at which it's not sensible to put fibre in. And I think that's where terrestrial fixed wireless absolutely comes in. I think there's a place for it. And I've been sort of calling for a little while for BDUK to go, right, okay, what are the prems that we see are the last ones that aren't commercially viable for fibre? They should know by now. We've been rolling OMR. Well, it's turned over, I don't know how many times, it's rolling and rolling. At what point do we go, right, we now know and commit? Because then we can all go, right, okay, investors, we've got another thing to do. And I'm really looking at that. One of the things that we did at Wilderness and with Quickline, we sort of worked together, was on 5G, fixed wireless access. So while Quickline were looking at, so we always used to take the mickey out of each other with me and Ian Smith, that Quickline were looking at distance where I was more interested in breadth. But so, it was, they were always interested in what range can I get off my 5G system. I was always pushing towards the gigabit end of things, which is a stretch in the lower bands, but at 26 gig, it's absolutely there. And as you say, Raj, it's multi-gigabit. And I think there's a real case for looking at that. And especially with the way that Ofcom have sorted the shared access license as well. I think that's a friendly license regime for doing that. And I think there's a real case for it to be looked at seriously. But we need government to go, this is where you're going to be. Because if you were to get investment and then government would intervene with fibre in that area, it's too risky. So you would have to know where you're going to be safe investing, I would suggest.
Yeah. I think this collides a bit with the USO as well. So universal service obligation. So
USO 10 megs. When are they going to? Yeah,
indeed, exactly my point. That's kind of just not fit for purpose. So I think Ofcom need to kind of figure out where they're going with USO and how that drives connectivity in those hard to reach places.
Have you got a comment on that, Harry, at all?
No, not a lot to add. I think it's definitely an interesting kind of difficult challenge. I mean, I think speaking of kind of wireless as a solution, I think Ofcom's they auctioning millimeter wave spectrum at the moment. I think maybe.
So they just had the 26 gig auction, and that essentially carved out the 8 largest, if I'm right, 8 largest conurbations in the country had select just for the MNOs, and there is a large chunk. There's a 2 gig chunk that's been made available as shared access license over a large part of the country, which is really interesting. We were talking about it 2022. I was talking to Ofcom about it, and they were going to auction on the whole country. And I'm like, that's 2 million base stations to cover the country. It's not really going to happen. So you're not going to get the value out of it if you auction all of it. If you use your 5G, if you use your shared access license that they were looking at, they just started it. Use that in the 26. I think you'll get some real innovation, and I still think that.
Yeah, I think it's been that part of the spectrum. I think has been a really interesting area around the world. I mean, you look at markets like South Korea where they auctioned these licenses, paid a load of money for them, and I think all the operators there were thinking, we're arguably the most advanced in the world. Like, if anyone's going to make good use of this and kind of make some money out of the spectrum, and kind of, I don't think they were particularly maybe targeting FWA quite so much as things like private networks and stuff like that. Yeah. But they had their licenses revoked because none of them could meet their kind of service.
Wasn't being used.
Yeah, it simply wasn't being used. And so I think there's a lot of scope to kind of grow as we kind of start using these high band spectrum. And I think it's similar a bit in a way with the LEO stuff. I mean, I'd be obviously really curious to see what happens over in the US with Starlink buying all this spectrum from EchoStar and kind of what role satellite company are they going to actually kind of become a bit of a competitor to the MNOs over in the US? I mean, I highly doubt it, really.
For us, it's an interesting challenge. Do we put a critical part of our network, as in the edges? There's definitely a place for LEO. The edge of our network is absolutely, and I don't know if you've used Starlink. 5 minutes out of the box and it's working. It's absolutely brilliant. It's annoyingly great to use. But do you want to put your nation's comms and people on another country's network, and that's a commitment. And I'd also point to the company that has disobeyed laws in other countries, particularly Brazil's Supreme Court came very close with Starlink. So, it's a difficult one. It's definitely got a place, but the permanence of it are a challenge.
There's going to be capacity issues, right? That's I think what some of the biggest challenges is. We're talking when we're saying about fibre being the kind of gold standard. It's going to be hard for anything that we can kind of conceive of right now to come out and kind of wipe out the fibre network and make that, make it super necessary to upgrade that immediately. But if we start, if everybody doubles their usage on the satellite network and the satellite network suddenly has 5 times as many customers as it has today, that's going to be a huge issue for these networks.
They've already had it in the southeast of this country where they stopped selling for a while, and in Isles of Scilly, I think there's a congestion charge on top of your rental.
Yeah, so it sounds fun, but maybe it's not going to be the kind of most obvious and widespread solution.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting segue to our next topic, which was about actually infrastructure competition. And the thing is, I think from what we've just discussed is networks are no longer sort of one-dimensional. It's not just in the ground. I mean, this access, we're talking about access to the end user. Guess what? There are multiple ways of achieving that. So it's maybe not just, one-dimensional, i.e. looking at just between the altnets infrastructure, but also delivering various technologies. But something you wanted to cover as well.
That follows what Raj did with Project Gigabit. The realization that infrastructure competition is the real one that benefits consumers. ISPs running over the same network that's just a price game and maybe branding a bit. But the real benefit to the country is to have multiple operators at somebody's front door, because that's where the competition lies and that's where the benefits lie. The only reason that Openreach rolled out fibre was because other people rolled out fibre. They would still be quite happy talking about, guess what, we can get over our copper now, if they were left to it. And the reality of network competition has been a benefit to this country, where we've got 70% of people able to get gigabit services. I think that's the way, and what we need to at the moment from an altnet perspective is to make sure that we're supported by the regulations around it. So the telecom access review that's going on at the moment is critical. What comes out of that and how Ofcom support the fair playing field over the next 5 years is absolutely critical to the next 30 years. What happens over the next 5 is where the altnets, as we started off, that consolidation piece is about having a solid market and a fair bet for all of the investors. And so long as what comes out of the TAR supports that fair bet principle and supports that even playing field, I think it'll work well, and there'll be good infrastructure competition across the country.
Just for the sake of acronym soup, TAR?
Telecoms Access Review. It's the previous version, just to make it even worse, was called the WFTMR, the Wholesale Fixed Telecoms Market Review, which is a 5-year review of the regulations around telecoms. They were very kind to us this year by just calling it Telecoms Access Review. Yeah.
Okay, good. Raj, what's your take on this question?
Well, I mean, infrastructure competition, I think, is essential. It was a fundamental part, as I said, of Project Gigabit, and it means different in different parts of the country, clearly. So we envisaged when setting up Project Gigabit there'd be 3 to 4 in urban areas, going down to 1, possibly 2 in rural areas. And I think broadly you're seeing that. There's maybe a bit more competition in rural areas. There's been a bit more overbuild than we would have thought. Obviously, Openreach, going to 30 million, 31 million, 32 million, whatever the number ends up being. I think Clive's been very bullish on, assuming that the country is his to go and fibre as much as he wants to. So I think infrastructure competition is essential. That's where I'll start from. And it's essential to ensure that that continues, is my next point, because we all started this thinking that we'd build a lot quicker, we'd connect a lot quicker, and so on and so forth. And that hasn't happened. You know, the macros have changed, you know, the whole build process has slowed down. So I think it's right that if capital is still being asked to be more patient, that the fair bet should allow capital to that patient capital to allow to get the returns that it sought in the first place. So you know, and I think it gets more complicated because, as I'd said earlier, you know, there's going to be winners and losers in that, and then that's very, very clear. But I think we do need to preserve infrastructure competition for the next period through the TAR, the Telecoms Access Review. I think that's absolutely essential. But it's also important, I think, you know, that there is that retail competition on top of the infrastructure, and the service differentiation probably will come from retail providers and not necessarily infrastructure providers. Infrastructure providers will provide the capability for the service providers on top to then differentiate, and that's the way it should be. You know, I think customers will engage with the service providers. The service providers will then want to, you know, perhaps through somebody like Zen, as we talked about earlier, make sure that they can connect to as many networks as they possibly can do to provide not just a regional, but a pseudo-national or even national service if you bundle in OpenReach as well for their customers. So I think both are important, but it starts with infrastructure competition, and it needs to, you know, persist for, you know, the next period, the next TAR period.
Super. I think I'd like to just move on to the next topic, if you don't mind. And it also allows you, Harry, to one comment on what was just been said, if you like, and a segue then to the part public sector can play and also local authorities. As I say, I think at the event, and I did see that as a big difference to almost any other event I go to, is you were kind enough to invite the public sector, who were not just, they were there in numbers, but were also there, which is not normal for what I understand the public sector. They were there with enthusiasm and wanting to learn and discuss. So well done for bringing them on board. But something you wanted to raise yourself as to how can they get involved and where do you see that going?
You're very Crawleyan. They're always very keen to get engaged with all of this. But I think, you know, at Connected Britain, the public sector and kind of the role local government plays is enormous. I mean, you know, we mentioned earlier the kind of impact that the kind of local governments in kind of Manchester are having on easing way leaves and things like that. You know, these local governments can make a really big impact quite quickly. And we've made a really big effort at Connected Britain to try and always bring that in, because I think, you know, everyone wants to speak to them. The vendors are there to kind of be like, well, they should be using our technology. The operators want to engage with them in ways that where they can maybe see multiple local authorities at once and see what's kind of on everyone's agenda, and they want to engage with each other, which I think is you would hope would be a much easier kind of project for all of them. But I think in reality, a lot of these places are very, very siloed in their approach to digitalization and technology, and they don't really know what's going on, you know, 50 miles down the road. It could be an entirely different ball game for these guys. I think maybe the thing that I kind of like to highlight is the impact that the actual kind of digital leadership can have in terms of individuals kind of really driving this. I think because there isn't this really strong framework made kind of both by the government, but even on a kind of more like regional scale, an individual who really understands technology and is really engaged and kind of discovered, like, knows the industry can really have a huge impact. And I think we're seeing that in a few kind of councils, like places like Sunderland and Newcastle. You know, the guys over at like West Midland 5G and stuff do great work over there. I think there's so much scope for these communities to be involved with, you know, in partnership with the operators, but also kind of in partnership with each other. And I think that the kind of big thing would be to get all these individuals to, I guess, be able to share their ideas more smoothly, more efficiently, and kind of scale up some of these projects that are happening and doing kind of great work where for certain communities, but maybe the same thing could be easily replicated, again, down the road, but it isn't being. And so I hope that Connected Britain is someone that kind of helps those conversations happen. But it's something I think we need to kind of, as an industry, work on a lot better, because I think the kind of communication across the board with these public sector organisations is never quite as good as it should be.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I was on a panel that had Liz Harrison from Kent Council and Georgia from Liverpool Regional Authority, talking about, how to do that. And then practically 2 days later, I was in a meeting with the ADEPT group, which is the place directors of the councils. And we were talking about exactly that. How do they efficiently share best practice? How do they enthuse everybody as well? Because, there are places that have a real positive digital champion and they're really making a difference. And there are other places not so. And it's more of, that's IT's problem almost. And my whinge from the altnet sector is quite often there's a comment of, well, let's wait for OpenReach as well, when there's an altnet ready to go. So those kind of things, and I would say that from a depth's view, they were really positive on it, and it was like, okay, how do we get together and share and get the best out of that? That's what came from it. And what you said about individuals promoting it, I think that's really, really interesting, because the Manchester mayor and the Liverpool mayor have this sort of almost rivalry over how many people have fibre in their area. It's almost the first thing they say is what percentage of fibre they have within their area. And the Liverpool mayor has it as one of his 5 pillars, and what have you, and they have the Liverpool Connect system and things like that. So, yeah, absolutely. When they concentrate on it, local authorities and people in local authorities can make a real difference.
The art of the possible, I'd say. Raj, over to you.
Well, I would hate to keep going on about Project Gigabit, but when one of the other programs that I ran was called the Local Full Fibre Networks Program, and it had something called PSAT in there, which is Public Sector Anchor Tenancy. And the principle, so that the kind of theory we were trying to prove was you could use public sector assets, so buildings, and deliver digital infrastructure to those buildings, connect those, use suppliers, the supply side, to come in and deliver that connectivity, and that would stimulate the delivery across that kind of regional economy as well. And PSAT actually was the program that launched City Fibre. City Fibre's government interaction. Didn't launch City Fibre, but PSAT was, and LFFM was the thing that City Fibre used very well, and then moved into Project Gigabit, which is a similar kind of intervention, but much more of a kind of top-down government intervention rather than a supply-side intervention. So the power of local government is the point, and they do have so much power to stimulate their own regional economies, and just in terms of rolling out some infrastructure, that can deliver an awful lot of change, not just in infrastructure terms, but then all the services on top and all the stuff we've already talked about. So I think what you're seeing now is lots of governments understanding they have a massive, massive role to play in this, and lots of providers knowing that whilst there might be a government diktat that says this is what we want to do, it happens at a local level. It has to happen at a local level. And, the Wildernet and the GigaClears and whoever aren't talking to central government to roll out. They're talking to local governments to roll out. And so that's the important bit, is that kind of connection between suppliers and local organizations is so important. But I think about this in terms of when I went into government. I went into government and thought it would be really easy to kind of work across different departments and coordinate government, and it absolutely is not. And I think that's what suppliers see when they go into local government. It'd be really easy to figure out who you need to talk to get something done, and it absolutely is not. So there's a big piece for local government to do to kind of get their house in order, if you like. And I don't mean this as a criticism. It's I'm leaning in, and this is a kind of learning that I've heard actually from local government, from some of the panels, is that if they made it easier for suppliers to come to them and communicate with them, so that might be a digital team that just link right the way across all the different departments in government and then pull it all together. That really helps a Wilderness, a Gig Clear, and all the other infrastructure builders in order to deliver the infrastructure they want to deliver. So they've got such an important part to play. And I think they're only just realizing how they do that. And they'll probably say they're kind of not got enough funding to recruit people and so on and so forth and all that kind of stuff. But I think you just got to flip it on the head and say you can't afford not to because of the digital benefits it's going to deliver you. So it's such a great investment case. But yeah, they're just powerful entities.
It comes back to this micro scenario we were just talking about, the unconnected individually. If your town is connected, guess what? That also creates wealth and therefore more revenue, etc. So from the micro to the macro, and I think you've got then the champions or people, the art of the possible. I guess I think that's what I sort of hearing from you, Harry. There are people who are technical savvy enough who understand the connectivity piece and also understand, let's say, the needs of the community and therefore being able to join those dots. But there are councils, and without wanting to talk anyone down, but you do get some people at shows who are really in very blinkered or limited in their views as to what can be done and what they're looking for. So yes, best practice sounds a good one. I think that's, Harry, it's something we should maybe pursue and look offline.
The downside of all of the local authorities at Connected Britain is those are the ones that are engaged. Those are the enthusiastic ones. And it's probably that reverse logic of, we should be looking at the ones that aren't there and how do we connect with those? Because those are the ones that the most difference can be made if they're not engaged. One of the things that we agreed at the ADEPT meeting was to look at creating a directory of who do you call in the council when you're doing this kind of thing? But to flip that, who do you call at the altnet to engage as well? So, there was a two-way street to be had there.
Do you mind for our audience what's ADEPT?
It's the I don't know what the acronym is. It's a grouping of the place directors of the local authorities. So those are people with titles like highways director and things like that. So their responsibility is the local area. So environmental things and like that, rather than education and things like that, which aren't place directors. They're, social or whatever. Yeah.
So these people involved with the digital path, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got Liz Harrison, for example. She leads digital in Kent Council. Connecting Devon and Somerset CDS are members of ADEPT as well. So, it's people like that. And it's their digital directors that are in that grouping. So ADEPT has the other areas as well. They have an environmental group and what have you. Yeah.
Well, it's been a great discussion. I just want to tee up some final comments maybe from your side. Do you feel from the event there was anything not discussed that should be highlighted as your sort of final comments? Or have you got general statement also related to this podcast that something could have been highlighted more, which we didn't cover? I will start, if you don't mind, with Raj. Have you got a view on that? And then to Paddy and then to Harry. So.
Let me just say, Harry, first of all, it was a thoroughly enjoyable event. It was bigger and better than ever before. So, well done to you. Hats off. I didn't see it, but I heard about it, and I did hear the flash mob. So I can see the creativity that you're throwing into the event as well, which is really, really good. I'm not so sure from my point of view whether I've got things that I think should have been there that weren't there, if that was your question, Ian.
Well, it was around that, or even this podcast is something you wanted to raise. It's your last opportunity to raise a topic or raise some highlight something. That was my question.
Well, I think the thing for me is, having been at the start where we set up kind of infrastructure competition, if you like, I think the one thing that we need to ensure is that it gets given time to play out. So I think it's the single most important thing that we need right now from, I'll say government, but it's not necessarily central government. We all know that it's Ofcom and the TAR. But without that, I think we'll basically go backwards. So that's the thing for me that I think we need to all rally around and support. It would feel such a shame that we started off saying that, but then we kind of changed tack halfway through. That just doesn't make sense at all, does it?
Good point. Paddy, you've got, I guess, several hats.
Yeah, I mean, Connected Britain, I think it's great. XL used to be really far out, but now the Lizzie line's working. It's it's like you go, how far have I travelled? Yeah, I think it's really good. What's missing? I mean, a comment that altnets don't do branding for themselves, but Netomnia did their single marketing event of the year there when they did their rebrand. They don't do spend on marketing other than to their consumers, so that's really interesting. ITS had the pub, so they obviously think it was worth doing at that event. And so I thought it was, kudos for that side of things. That's what's seen by it. What's missing? I'm always intrigued that there's not more software platforms there. The Salesforces and those kind of things, MS and Azure and all of those kind of people don't seem to see it yet. And I suppose that comes down to the size of the telecoms market compared to the data center market and things like that comparably. So, interesting in that way. And it'd be remiss of me as Inca CEO not to mention the Inca Summit on the 21st and 22nd of October. So, I'm sure you're all coming to that. Yeah.
Perfect. Hopefully we're all invited, is that?
Of course.
And hopefully there is follow the ITS, bring the pub to the people, not the other.
I thought that was great, and I always like the tallest stand. The one where you can stand on top and see everything from.
It's always a fight as to who gets the the skyline. Yeah.
And Harry, as representative also of the organisers, what's your final thoughts on the event?
Yeah, no, I mean, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it as well. I think it does always get bigger and better. We are always trying to kind of evolve the event into to kind of follow the themes that are kind of emerging. And I think maybe the biggest challenge, if I put my kind of journalist hat away and put the event organizer hat on, is for us, there are still organizations that don't want to have these conversations. Like we were talking about kind of some areas of the public sector that's still kind of quite difficult to get people to come out and speak on this. And I think it's not just the public sector, of course, there's private sector organizations as well. But I think there's lots of these organizations maybe are those that don't have a dedicated lead that's doing the digital stuff. And so kind of getting representation from those guys is quite difficult. I mean, look at like all their, I don't know, let's say like heavy industry, they're all using these networks. They're paying thousands and thousands for various kind of managed service providers and things like that. To actually get them to come and kind of share their experience and say, this worked really well for us. This is what we're still struggling with. Because from our perspective, we know that that's what the telecoms community, they'd love to talk to these guys and kind of, offer these solutions and really just to learn more about these problems. But from an event organizer's perspective, it seems like they're always really difficult to get a hold of. So yeah, my plea would be anyone listening to this who's one of these organizations that thinks they could be doing better with digital technology, please reach out, and we'd love to have you come and share your experiences for 2026 or indeed at kind of Connected North in I think April next year up in Manchester. So yeah, please reach out. We'd love to see you.
And the Peaky Blinder evening in Manchester is one not to be missed at any case.
Well, we like to put on a party as well, don't we? So.
Harry, I think you should have a Connected Britain bus that goes up and down the country and do a tour and take tea and coffee and biscuits to all of the local authorities and get people in and tell them what they're missing.
There's an idea there. You never know.
Could be big.
So a bit of creativity on this podcast as well. I like to see that. From my side, I think it's really the human aspect in the sense of it gives you a way to meet this crucible of people meeting together in the same place. Because we often are now, similar to this podcast, sitting behind a computer. But once you've, of course, met someone in person, those sort of conversations get easier next time round. So really from a networking perspective, catching up with people, learning new things. So again, I think these events are really vital for helping the industry as a whole. So again, thank you for Connected Britain, the team behind that. And I wouldn't have met you gentlemen either, So Jane, thank you very much for taking your time out of your busy days to be on the podcast, and look forward to having you maybe on future guests. You're now part of the Digital Talk community, and look forward to you continuing your great work. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Great. Thanks, Ian.
We are honoured to be media partners with Network X at this year's flagship event from Informa Connect to do with all things telecommunication, which was held in Paris this October. Big news is that next year this event is moving to Vienna, so mark your diaries for the 13th to 15th of October 2026. To be one of the first to access our interesting interviews from this event with Orange and the Telecommunications Industry Association, amongst others, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join the community by following us on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening and stay tuned.